Welcome to the Austin Moss Show, where business isn't just business. It's a battlefield, a playground, and a launch pad for impact all rolled into one. But listen, this isn't just another business podcast. This is where we get real, where we challenge the way you think, break through the limits you set on yourself, and uncover the boldest strategies that drive growth, wealth, and purpose. Welcome to the movement. This is the Austin Moss Show. I'm your host, Austin Moss. Let's get after it. Today's guest is known as the No Hassle King, and for good reason. Jim Bramlett has spent over 40 years cutting through the noise, helping business leaders eliminate friction, scale smarter, and dominate their industries. He's built companies from the ground up, coached top CEOs, and developed a framework that changes how businesses think and operate. Jim's the author of Stop the Hassle and the Unconventional Thinking of Dominant Companies, where he breaks down the real reasons why some businesses thrive and why so many others get stuck. In this episode, we're diving into the mindset traps that hold entrepreneurs back, the 4 buying behaviors every business needs to understand, and how AI and tariffs are shaking up industries. This is a raw, unfiltered conversation about leadership, risk, and strategy. So if you're ready to rethink how you grow, this one is for you. Check it out. All right, welcome back to the Austin Moss Show. We got Jim Bramlett here. Welcome. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Austin. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I'm your host, Austin Moss. We're about 10 episodes into the Austin Moss Show, really just trying to break down business strategies, entrepreneurship, even personal things that, really hold a business owner, entrepreneur back. It's a grind, right? I mean, being a business owner is a grind, and you see it every day. And it's not as simple. You see all the social media, like, become an entrepreneur and, be an influencer, do all this stuff, start a business. And yes, like the front end pieces are simple, but, go make $1. But there's so many other facets to this. And that's what I'm excited to dive in with you. I did start getting into your book. So
Cool.
Stop the Hassle. I love the concept of it. And it's kind of similar to kind of how I've, over the last year and a half, probably started pivoting my life, was like just chaos and trying to reduce that down and just kind of try to focus on more of the mindfulness things. But let's give it a little bit of maybe your background and kind of, you've done a lot.
Yeah.
Done a lot over the years. So
I've done a lot. I tell everybody I grew up in the transportation and logistics space. I physically grew up in South Central Missouri, went to school down in Springfield, Missouri. And I got a sales job out of college, and it was very prescribed. It was exactly what you do, how you do it, and I was in a town I didn't want to be in, and I actually went back to my placement office, and they had a management trainee job for Roadway Express down in Springfield, Missouri, and that sounded interesting to me. I just didn't want to be in sales. And that started my career. I spent 42 years in transportation and logistics. And what I liked about it, and I tell people, don't put me in a production line. I have to have something different every day. I may have ADD, I don't know. But for whatever reason, I've had a knack for creating things. I started my first company when I was a senior in college, failed miserably. Started my second one.
what was that? What did you get into in college?
Yeah, so in Springfield, Missouri, it's very well known for a dish called cashew chicken. And back in the day, there would be a cashew chicken place like every mile. And it's really good. It's a real simple recipe. And I'm from Rolla, 100 miles up the road. They didn't have one. And so I told my roommate, hey, we ought to start a cashew chicken place in Rolla. We'll go up and lease the space and hire some people, hire a manager, and we'll sit back and collect checks.
Mailbox money.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't work that way. So it was kind of a fun thing, but it didn't work out, didn't last, learned valuable lesson. Started my second company a few years later. Hey, I'm in trucking. I know trucking. I'm going to start a trucking company. And it's these old experiences that led to this book. I've learned it's not about me, not about my passion. I tell people, look, if you like to cook, don't start a restaurant. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about the customers and what's the need out in the market and how can you fill that need. So over my career, I've started 7 companies, some for myself, uh, some for other companies. Like I was with Yellow, and we started a couple things, and I enjoy that. I started a product, I've started divisions, and I find that startup to just be exhilarating,
The game.
man. Because there's no blueprint really, and I tell people uh, that starting a company with nothing but an idea in your head, that's really hard. It sounds simple. It's really, really hard. And people ask me, well, tell me after your years in business, what's the one piece of advice you would give somebody? And I tell them this: whatever you're going to do, it's always going to be harder. It's going to take longer than you ever anticipate. You can put a plan, a budget on paper, and say, "Oh yeah, in 2 years we're going to be cash flowing," and nah, it's all you're always going to run into bumps. It's always going to be harder and take longer than you ever thought imaginable. But it's
How do you so when you know that, what do you have to be thinking differently? Because I think there's misconceptions there. Everyone wants to start a business, but what do you have to think going into that to be successful? My first instinct is like the long-term thinking, right? Like I've been in both positions, starting companies, trying to do everything right away, and then starting companies and just understanding it as a journey.
yep.
And right. And so what are your thoughts on that as far
Yeah,
as,
when I started my first 2 companies, I didn't realize there would be this many bumps, and I gave up, because it wasn't working. And now, once you realize, hey, it is going to be harder, it's going to take longer than you originally thought, but as long as you keep that end goal, the vision, and your dream alive, and you're going to go through the bumps. It's the persistence that wins.
Yeah.
And so you got to understand that going in, because if you don't, like I didn't originally,
yeah,
it won't
it's
work.
not like a job, in
Yeah,
a job,
right.
you just go get a job and
I can go get
you
another
don't
one.
like it in a month, then just go switch,
I go
right?
get another one.
Yeah,
Right. That's
it's
exactly
a
right.
little more difficult in business, especially, if, it's different when you're young and you don't have responsibilities and things, but it's even more important that thinking of, you can't just jump in and out of things, especially if you have responsibilities and kids and stuff like that. So there's our people that are 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that want to start companies that have all these, different beliefs that are not true. Right. And it could work in their favor, could not. Right. And so, I want to dive into your book. So
Sure.
what made you write this book?
Well, there's a predecessor to that one called The Unconventional Thinking of Dominant Companies. And the genesis for that, I got asked to do a talk at a conference. All right, what do you want me to talk about? Whatever you want. And had been developing a number of new products at Yellow, and I just got to thinking about it, and so I slapped up some some hypotheses and made it work. But I started studying Amazon. I was so intrigued. How did this juggernaut, take off like it did? And Jeff Bezos, who I love, big fan. Back when I started the company in '99, he was he was being roasted. He was a villain. He was burning through cash left and right, but he stayed the course. He had a vision, he had a purpose, and he wasn't going to give up on it. And so I started saying, well, what made them so successful? And I kind of came up with this loose formula. And then, of course, when I got introduced to Uber and compared to a cab, I said, wait a minute, there's some real similarities here. And then I'm an old uh, blockbuster junkie that would always get disappointed on Friday and Saturday evening, when you go in the new release aisle and go, well, okay, do you want to watch Jaws again, honey? No. So I became real enamored with Netflix. And I put the common denominator. There are common denominators there. And so my first book was, well, here, look, here's the formula. Now they're not going to come out and tell you, much like the Coke formula, they're not going to come out and tell you the formula. But I studied what it is they do, and they all do the same thing, and it's really meeting the needs of customers. Well, what are those needs? In a lot of startups, I hear this all the time. Well, we fulfilled an unmet need. We solved the problem. The one I hate the worst is, well, we disrupted an industry. What does that mean? And so I said, well, what are those needs? And so I have a hypothesis, a formula that I think those companies used in this book. Stop the Hassle is what I think any and every company, and I don't care if it's your marketing, selling merchandise, a service. I don't care what you are. Every buyer has what I believe are four major categories of need or criteria by which they make a decision on what they're going to buy.
Repeat that again. What is it? Four major categories of
buying criteria.
Okay.
So what they're going to buy and from whom. And in most cases, it's innate. In other words, you and I also, we're buyers. We buy something every day. We might buy coffee, we might buy lunch, might buy gasoline. We buy something every day. We're not professional buyers. But innately, we make a decision. Okay, what are we going to buy, and then from whom? And those four categories are this. They're simple. The number one thing we buyers are looking for is convenience. I believe that time and not money is our most precious commodity. So when I'm looking to buy, I want to save time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I tell people this: when I'm on a journey in my car and I'm going rolling down the interstate and I pull off, I'm going to get my gas on the right-hand side of that interstate. I don't want to cross across the overpass and through lights, and the gas is going to be priced the same. But now, if on the right-hand side, I've got a couple options, I'm going to probably take the one that I believe will give me the best experience. It's well lit, it's clean. I believe their bathrooms are clean and tidy. But anyway, the first one is convenience, saving time, saving effort, and those two are highly related. I think we humans are all looking for the easier path. I don't want to exert a lot of effort if I don't have to. But I also want ease and simplicity. So that makes up convenience. So if I have an option and one's more convenient than the other, price the same experience, I'm going to opt for convenience. Number two is price. And it's a fallacy. People say, well, I'm only going to buy the low price. No, that's not true. I believe, yes, as a seller, you need competitive pricing. Otherwise, you're going to create a hassle because now I got to go figure things out. But even more importantly is pricing transparency. I don't like the little fine print and like dealing with airlines and, oh, wait, you owe us another $200 because of this. Wait, I didn't know that. Or I really don't, enjoy working with attorneys. I know they're charging me hundreds of dollars per hour, but I never know how many hours they're going to spend. I don't hire somebody to paint my house. Yeah, we charge $100 an hour. Well, okay, how many hours? Well, we'll let you know. No, I'm not going to. So that price transparency. I like to know what I'm spending before I make my purchase. So transparency is very important to us buyers. Number three is user experience. Now, when we're about to make a buying decision, we have a perception in our head of what we should be receiving in return for the money. Now, if that brand has a brand promise, I really better get that. But I have a certain perception, and so I want that, but I also want to be treated special. I like to be treated like I'm their only customer, even though I know they don't. But and if it's a bigger ticket item or a complicated I want to talk to them. I want to ask questions and I want answers. And maybe I don't want to talk to a bot because I get frustrated. I waste a lot of my time and a lot of my effort. But if it's merchandise, the user experience can be style, durability, efficiency. If I'm buying a service, I want professionalism. I like uniforms, because that tells me things. I want, rapid response. But I just like this whole user experience. If I'm going to dine at a chop house. I'm going to expect, great aesthetics, atmosphere. I should have a very polite, engaging uh, waiter or waitress. Then I
Yeah.
want really good food. It better be darn good and hot. If I'm going through McDonald's, I'm not expecting a sumptuous meal, but I do expect it to be warm. I expect my bun to be, fresh. And oh, by the way, I want my fries in my combo meal. I don't like pulling out because that's a hassle. So that user experience is very important. And the final one is trust, especially if I haven't bought or purchased anything from this seller. I want to trust that I'm going to get what I expect. Well, how do I do that? Well, maybe it's testimonials, maybe it's references, could be a warranty, guarantee. Maybe even if I'm buying merchandise, it's easy returns, free returns. Maybe I know how long they've been in business. Okay, that gives me some idea. Or maybe they've won some awards. All of that builds trust because if I don't get what I'm expecting to get, I've got an out. And so my hypothesis, and this is where Amazon, Netflix, and Uber come in, I believe they hit on all four of those criteria that we have because they realize I don't want to give a buyer an excuse to go anywhere else. And I know people make buying decisions on convenience, price, user experience, and trust. So let me hit on all four of those, and I'll give my buyer fewer excuses to go elsewhere. Now, most companies have some sort of conscious trade off. And a couple examples.
Of being able to like execute on all four of those.
No, they have a conscious trade off. Like, look, we're gonna give you convenience, but you're gonna have to.
Oh, it's if you're gonna
for it.
give and take.
That's
so if
exactly
you want a lower
right.
price, you're gonna get worse service. If you want better service, you're gonna have to pay more.
Or yeah, if I'm gonna give you a low price, it's gonna be concrete floors, and there's not gonna be a lot of help around, and bring your own bags, and
So I see. So my question with that, my first gut instinct is that takes a lot of work, a lot of planning, a lot of setup. So the adage of starting a business and like doing what you can do, it's not scalable, but get it to work and then figure out how to scale it. So how do you? So talk through that, like, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs get hung up with too many detailitis issues. Right. And I've seen it with myself, trying to get everything perfect for the user, trying to get everything buttoned up before you go to the market. Right. Or before you expand your market or before. Right. So talk through, like, what does somebody need to think about?
In the startup world, you're not going to hit on all four. You're
Yeah.
just not. I mean, very few companies hit on all four today.
That have been around for decades.
Yeah, Walmart.
Yeah.
I tell you, okay, everyday low price rollback America. Yeah, they're fairly convenient, but the user experience. Hope you like checking yourself out. The store layouts are totally different. You don't know if they've got the product you're actually looking for. Parking lots are crowded, and it's not as well lit, and maybe as clean as maybe say a Target, right? So you are. So we, the other part of this is you and I have our own personal value system, and I said this earlier. My trigger is time. I will pay more if somebody will save me time. Okay, I'm a TSA pre guy. Right? I paid because I want to get through security fast, and I don't want to take my shoes off. So that's a little bit of convenience there. So I'll pay for that. So a startup isn't going to be able to hit on all four. Well, what you can deliver, excel at that. Like if you were going to go in and say, well, I'm going to be retail and I'm competing with Walmart. Well, you don't have their buying power. You are not going to have their pricing power. So you need to hit on the other three. Okay. You need to be extremely convenient. My user experience. Hey, call me by my name. Hey, when I walk in, is this your first time here? And well, welcome back. Whatever you can do to make that, because I don't believe the user experience is really all that expensive to maintain. Right.
I mean, again, my thoughts are going to, so it's funny, part of the Hellsberg group actually in town, and he was the CEO of Levi Jeans. And then he also started a couple other companies, but they're basically take traditional basic models, add a little bit of elevated premium to them, add a drastic amount of elevated price, right? And so that's what he was telling me. What all he did to turn the Levi jeans around was double the price of all the jeans.
Oh.
Literally. And it's like so when you say about price, your price isn't necessarily have to be the cheapest.
Not at all.
But it's got to be all aligned. It's kind of what you're saying.
Does.
You know,
Absolutely.
all those 4 categories, for you to go to price, you have to elevate the other 3.
Absolutely.
Right?
I was coaching a CEO. He had a union shop in the sheet metal industry. He said, my competitors are non-union, so my cost structures are heavier. Okay. Lever being more convenient than your competitors. Lever giving them a greater user. What kind of proactive communication do your customers want, need? Are you delivering on time? Are you able to hit the bids? What kind of guarantee? So lever those other 3 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
But, as a young, naive kid, when I started those businesses, I was brought up in the era of, you got to have a competitive advantage. I look at it today and say, you can't have a single competitive advantage. It's like having a one-wall castle. Well, everything's good out that way, and they're sneaking up on you from behind. Because the technology today and the innovation today is so strong, somebody can come knock your one competitive advantage off very quickly. And that's how startups should be started. Startups should be evaluating businesses and industries to say, hey, you know what? It's not a very good user experience. I think we can improve on the experience. Or you know what? It takes too much time to buy from them, or the product isn't saving me as much time. So find those weaknesses, form your startup, not because you like to cook, but, oh, hey, you know what? There's no restaurants out here, or there's no good Greek food within 10 miles. That is a reason, because you're serving the needs of us customers.
Yeah. Yeah, very different. And that I can see too when you get in, because I think a lot of startups, they're in that mode of, competitor analysis and product market fit and all these different components. And us getting into venture capital is, we're thinking about this all the time because of innovation and technology and the speed of everything. It's like, you got to really, it's not so much, even back to all these strategies and pricing and all this stuff is great. But if you can't have the mental wherewithal to sustain through all these different things you have to learn and understand. And so,
but that's the other part of my book. So in this book, I talk about the formula, those 4 criteria.
Yeah.
But how do you sustain that? Okay. And I have a couple crazy thoughts.
Because that popped in my mind. I'm like, you get down the road and you get in the trenches of everything, you lose sight of a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Too.
And you don't change. And so I tell people crazily that I think every company should have an R&D function. And I said, no, you're not in the pharmaceuticals or some scientific business. But R&D is, you need to research your competitors. What are the alternatives that a buyer has to buying from you? And how are they stacked up to you on convenience, on price, on user experience, and on trust? And guess what? The target's always going to move, because we consumers, we want to save more time. We want to save more effort. We want even a better experience, right? And so you've got to understand, I joke, being a Chiefs fan, I go, listen, Andy Reid doesn't show up at Arrowhead on Sunday morning and, hey, who are we playing? And what do they like to do? Do they like to run the ball? Did they pass? And what kind of defense? They play zone, man. Well, I guess we'll just find out. No, they study their opposition, and they're trying to find the weakness. So I don't care how big you are. If you don't understand the alternatives that a buyer has, and maybe it's a do-it-yourself, I can wash my own car versus go out. But understand, and then you constantly have to be innovate. And I tell people there's a big difference between invention and innovating. I believe innovating is all about, if you cut time off of a process, you make it easier, simpler, that's innovating. If you find a way to cut costs out, that's innovation, okay? If you figure out how to make the user experience better, that's innovation, right? Or make it more trustworthy. So concentrate on constantly innovate, because we're very picky consumers, and we're always looking for those.
And there are so many moving so quick that if you're not looking at that, your competitors are looking at it.
Absolutely.
There's going to be one competitor out there that's looking at that, at least, right? So if you're not, you're going to be swept up under that, right?
Blockbuster got surprised when Netflix showed up and said, "You don't have to come to the store anymore."
Right.
Right.
Right. I wanted so that company, because I had a similar. So I was at Freight Quote early on in my career, and then started a freight broker. Similar thing, right? I was like one of my earlier businesses. And, like, oh, I understand this. I'm good at it. I'm good at getting account sales side. There's a lot more to business than just the sales pieces of it, right? And you think you understand that and you get into it. I ended up selling that off, small portfolio. It wasn't much, but it was just, sold it off to Traffic Tech, which is out of Canada. But it was my first, like, real experience of trying to do tradition. I was in marketing out of high school and, like, just doing that whole thing, but getting in and thinking, like, okay, yeah, I failed miserably, right? And
was it about you, or was it about?
It was
about finding out how I got a better mousetrap.
It was more of a little bit of a better mousetrap, and I think the scalability and the time to take that to where I wanted to go with it, and what was already out there was going to be very long term, and I didn't care. I wasn't that passionate about freight, right? Like, right. I landed some great Home Depot and Lowe's type stuff, and it was great. But anyway, I love what I do now in finance and working with entrepreneurs and lending and finding capital. So, but what you said something there is like, because we kind of do that, like at Capital Collab, we have 350 lenders on our platform. So we've had up to like 700. So like we're constantly, even though we're not a lender, right? Like we're almost doing that legwork for, businesses, right?
Like trying to saving them time, you saving them effort?
Time, money, energy, effort, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
there's value there.
Yeah, but thinking through completely pivoting. Capital bootstrapping versus raising and that mindset, right? So I don't know how much you deal with that. I know you're dealing with a lot of more established CEOs mostly, I think, right? Or some startups.
A little bit of both, but okay. I raised capital back in the day.
What was your experience? What was your first time raising?
It was in 1999, right in the height of the .com hysteria. And I'll tell you a very funny story because it relates. I think it was 98. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal on the front page, and a 23-year-old MBA student was out of Silicon Valley, and they were bidding. The venture capitalists were bidding to invest in furniture.com. And my reaction was, wait a minute, what does a 23-year-old MBA student understand about the furniture business? And it led to me starting my company. But I misread the tea leaves and said, gosh, there's so much money, they're bidding.
Right.
And with what I know about transportation, this is going to be easy. And I wrote a business plan, and nothing happened until I got traction. I had to go get a customer and prove that what I put on paper would work. And ultimately it did. But getting capital can make you a little lethargic and lazy, and maybe not keeping your nose to the grindstone because you got a pretty fat. So I made a ton of mistakes.
Yeah,
a ton of mistakes because of that. And I remember a board member, he kept telling me, "Cash is king. Cash is king." I didn't get it. I did. I got it at the end.
Yeah,
we didn't have cash. And I go, okay, now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because they're in your corner, but they're only going to go so far with you. And, life's full of hard lessons, and that was certainly one for me.
Yeah. So what do you do for your own like mental well-being? Do you have any routines? I wanted to, what do you establish for like your own, because entrepreneurs, we're talking about all these things in the business, customers, all that stuff. But what do you think for yourself? And then what do you suggest for people that haven't really focused on that? Right. They're just grinding. They're just going. They're right out of school. They're just going, and they're going to hit these roadblocks if they haven't focused on some of these things.
Yeah. First of all, my experience was when I started that company back in '99, I was 24/7, 365 up here in my head. It never stopped. And I had no work-life balance. It was impacting my family. I had young kids, and I wasn't going to activities. So I finally realized I needed diversion, and and I had a daughter who was 15, and she was my diversion. She was doing sports and like get away. Well, then she got a driver's license, which now she's no longer my diversion because she's never there. And so that's when I picked up and learned a musical instrument because I had to concentrate so intently on that. It has made me escape all the other thoughts I had, and you know, I encourage leaders. You gotta find a balance because it can wear you out, burn you out. Now I'm older. I've been blessed. I had a startup 7 years ago. I meant it to be a lifestyle business in the logistics space, technology play. I added a couple people, but I'm in the grind. Making this thing work. And my wife retired years ago, and she starts poking me. Remember all those things we're going to do in our golden years? And I go, yeah. My idea of retirement was always, hey, I want to do something I really love, but have a flexible schedule. I'm never going to sit on the porch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she poked long enough and hard enough that I did. And then I found that there's no purpose in pickleball, golf, and tennis. And I'm a guy who's got to have purpose. Fortunately, I got contacted by Vistage, and I never heard of them. Told me what they're all about, supporting leaders and forming into these small peer groups. And they were looking for what's called a chair, which I am. It's a facilitator. And I sat there and thought, boy, if I can help any other leader avoid some of the trials and tribulations I went through. But at the root of it, I'm a business nerd. I love learning how all these businesses work. And so that's how I keep myself in tune. I get to work. I coach these business leaders. We meet. I get to hear their challenges. I get to hear their wins. And I get to ride along. But I don't wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat like I used to.
Right. You don't have all those day-to-day fires and all that stuff. You can help with them from afar, which is great, which is valuable.
I empathize. Right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I'm not in the fire.
Yeah. No, that's great.
That's how I keep in contact.
What do you see with all these entrepreneurs? What are like right now, this year, like what are a lot of them struggling with? Is there any commonalities? It's just all the same stuff that people always struggle with?
So in Vistage, so I lead 2 Vistage groups, and we don't allow competitors in a group because we want you to come and bare your soul. What is it that's really holding you back? And it can be personal, it can be health, or it can be business. But you've got a room of advisors, trusted, like-minded peers who are here to help you. So lay it all out there, and yet nobody in this room is going to help you with your core competency skill set. If you run a manufacturing company, we don't know your process and how to manufacture that any better. It's all the peripheral things, especially for a leader. Well, guess what? Most of the challenges that these leaders have are people related. When I started this, we were going through the quiet quitting phase.
What do you mean?
The quiet quitting when 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
People were just leaving. They weren't even saying goodbye and leaving. And then we went into this. I can't find people, qualified people, and how do I retain these? Gosh, I got to pay a king's ransom now to retain my people. So that, I think, for any leader is going to be a continuing saga. We had a speaker come into our group not long ago, and he said, okay, no surprise, guys, but the birth rates are declining. The death rates are increasing. And by 2038, they're going to cross. And there are going to be fewer and fewer qualified people that you need to help you run your businesses. So you need to know that now. And of course, we're really emphasizing a lot on AI and that kind of thing. So it's a lot of it's people, but these last few months, I don't know. It's been pretty chaotic. Right now, we're dealing with tariffs.
I was literally that was my next question I was going to ask, because
Oh
you
my
see a
God.
lot of this stuff. I mean, you see a lot of things across a wider
Yep.
array of situations, right? Like tariffs all the way to hiring to
Interest
regulations,
rates and
all this stuff. So
all of
what's the
that.
tariffs what are people thinking? How are they pivoting?
Well, they
What
don't
are
know. It changes daily.
are they pivoting yet? Or are they just kind of in a limbo? Just
I've got-
kind of, is this going to affect us? Is it not? Do we not know yet?
I think they know it's going to affect them, but they don't know the significance yet because that it's not landed. But I've got a lumber distributor where a good chunk of his business comes out of Canada. And I go, what are you going to do? He said, I already talked to my suppliers, and my good partners are agreeing that we're going to split that.
Mm.
So they're going to subsidize.
Okay.
I've got an aerospace manufacturing company whose two biggest customers are, Northrop Grumman and Lockheed. Well, they lock them in to a price a long time ago.
Right.
And, supposedly there's no wiggle room. Yet he's importing aluminum and titanium from Canada. And he's tried to talk to the vendor and say, sorry.
Getting back into this, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into some of the intangibles just around business and how can you, because it's lonely, right? As an entrepreneur, it's very lonely as an entrepreneur, even though you have a lot of people around you, right? And so talk through that.
Yeah, I believe it is extremely lonely at the top. It was for me. And even though you think you got a team and we're family, at the end of the day, they have their own agenda. I had a speaker come in, and it really resonated with me, that said 90% of the time, employees are thinking about themselves. And when there's change, that jumps to 98% of the time. And even if you're the founder, the CEO, whatever, your C level, they got an agenda too. Yeah, they understand your vision and all that. So it's a real challenge. And one of the things that I'm a real big believer in AI and where that's going. I was around in '95 when that thing called the World Wide Web came out, and there were people who said, "Oh, it's a fad, never going to last." Well, you can't be that way with AI. But the other thing that strikes me, if you get a degree in some technical skills, be it in engineering, accounting, whatever, you've never really been prepped to lead people. And I believe the same thing could be maybe true for founders. They're founding a company based on some expertise, technical skill, capability, and they're probably pretty good at that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how good are they at leading and inspiring people? You can't force anybody to improve. You can't force anybody to do their best. You really can't force them to be motivated. So I believe the very best leaders need to be coaches. And that's a whole learned skill set. For example, coaches talk 20% of the time and they listen 80. Well, most leaders talk 80 and listen 20. And so that's a whole skill set in inspiring people. And I got a real quick story for you. I got to share. I did this with my Vistage group. Months ago, I went in and I started off the meeting just like a good attorney would. I knew they wouldn't know the answers. I said, hey, any of you know where Steve Spagnuolo went to school? Of course, it was crickets. Nobody answered. I said, well, he went to Springfield College. And I don't even know which Springfield. There's lots of Springfield. Yeah. All right, any of you know what position he played on the Springfield College football team? Nobody. Quiet. All right. He was a wide receiver. Any of you know, did Steve Spagnuolo play in the NFL? Quiet. And I said, okay, well, he didn't. So let me ask you a question. How does Steve Spagnuolo, who went to a very small college and was on the offensive side of the ball, how is it he became one of the best defensive coordinators and coaches in the NFL? And he's so good, He inspires his players so much. They created a shirt that said, "In Spags we trust." Now, how many of you have had your employees go, "In you we trust"? And he's inspiring multi-millionaires who probably never have to play or work another day in their life. So being able to inspire others, because you're in the people business. I don't care what industry you're in, what business you're in the people business. You have employees, you have customers, you have vendors. They're all people, and how you relate to them is going to set yourself. So, in our group, I really emphasize the skill sets, the best practices on how to deal and inspire people. We had another speaker come in, and he talked about employee engagement. And I didn't know this, but he said on average, 30% of employees are engaged. They're mostly bought in, they get the vision. 50% are not engaged, and 20% are actively disengaged, meaning they're toxic, they're recruiting others, and he said the gap, he said best in class companies are 64% engaged. But that delta between 30 and 64 collectively is billions and billions of dollars. So
how do they define engaged?
They're emotionally, they take initiative, they
care,
they volunteer, they care.
Yeah.
It's more than just, I did my job, right? I'm helping others. I want the company to succeed. They buy into the culture. It's just being that kind of mindset. But I get it. If you got a clock puncher, they just show up, they do their job, and they go home. Now they may not be troubled, but what else could they be helping with and doing?
Mm-hmm.
And well, okay, so you're a leader. How do you address an employee base that's not engaged? Again, your job's really to inspire them.
Right.
And I talk to a lot of leaders, and a lot of leaders are way too deep in the day-to-day, the minutia, and they really need to. Now, maybe in startups you got to, but you really got to elevate yourself up and become a mentor, a coach, a strategist, and working on big picture.
Yeah. And what you pointed back to earlier about, kind of that balance. And I was always like, I heard that all throughout my 20s, work-life balance. I was like, bullshit.
Yeah.
There ain't no way.
Right.
Like you have to grind and hustle and 80, 100-hour weeks to make it. Right.
Yeah.
And there's times I think that you have to do that, but it is not sustainable long term. And especially when you get into these little minutia things that can fail a business that aren't really talked about. It's giving yourself, I think, at least for me, is giving myself that space. Like you have to really work to do it, especially when you're my brain's the same way. Like I am constantly going, and unless I force myself to stop, I can't really disengage enough to think about the businesses, right? Like not that I'm focused, not that I'm grinding 80 hours a week, but my brain is always going, right? And so when I can get away from the businesses and go do something else, it allows me to keep that going, right?
Yep.
And I've seen it too many. I mean, myself, I probably hit burnout like 6 or 7 different stages throughout my career, and I think I finally started this last couple of years, really started to work on that, and it's made a huge difference in see the hope of being able to facilitate all this stuff long term, right? And I think a lot of people stress themselves out all in their own doing over a lot of that stuff.
Oh.
And I think that's what keeps a lot of founders as solopreneurs versus actual companies, right? Yep. And I think that's really one of the main difference. If you can get yourself to that point, then you can at least start to get that glaze off your eyes of like all these little like tasks that you're doing. And I get in that trap too. Let's go into the AI. So yeah. AI, we're doing a lot of development and different things with AI in different levels. What would you suggest for somebody that has a company? They're probably using ChatGPT in about that extent, but they really don't have a strategy. They don't know what the best ways are to using it. They see all this stuff all over the internet about all these different prompts and different things. But what do you see in these businesses of how they're best utilizing AI? to like have an impact right away?
Yeah, well, I'm all over it. I fortunately have what I believe to be one of the top AI practitioners in one of my Visage groups, and he's been doing machine learning since 2010, and a real visionary. And at first, it was all about I need you all to be curious. I can't tell you how to use AI, but and maybe you'll learn more from each other than you will any other way. So we did ChatGPT and Perplexity and Beautiful AI, those kind of things. Well, then RAG came out, and we started talking about private GPTs because you can't trust the information and data that's out there on the web, but hopefully you can trust your own data and information. And now we have AI agents, agentic AI, and they have reasoning capabilities. And so my member, he's kind of focused in the supply chain. So he has agents who, he has an inventory agent who's going to be looking at your data and be able to say, oops, we need more of this. And then he communicates with the purchasing agent whose job is they figure out the vendor. Okay, so scour all those options. Okay, and then get with the forecasting agent to say, well, how many of these were we going to need? And then cut a PO. Now, maybe the rule says the human has to look at that PO. But those back office functions now, and this is where, as the workforce narrows, we don't have as many qualified people out there. I believe the agentic AI doing the more routine, information-driven tasks. Now, I'm not a huge fan of AI bots in customer service. I want my answer. I want an answer, and I want it now. And you know,
some of the stuff you can tell, like somebody that doesn't know Chat GPT that well. You're like, okay, buddy, at least read through the email that you did with AI before you send it, because like this is not you.
I know, you can tell.
Yeah. And,
but I think that's going to be the real power. That's where, you know, and you got to pay attention if you're an entrepreneur, a leader. Is your competitor adapting AI agents that make them far more efficient in the back office, that then cuts their costs, that gives them an advantage over? That's what you really got to pay attention to. And oh my gosh, the videos I'm seeing with these robots and what they can do, it's like, it's just, it's
so it excites me.
Oh,
I mean,
it's incredible.
It does, because, you know, I believe there are a lot of those companies. I mean, and I deal in two very different extremes, right? I deal with alternative lenders and people that can deploy capital with fully automation within minutes up to millions, right? And then I have banks over here. And so what excites me is the fact that banks are so far from ever latching on to some of the AI and the technology, and for so many reasons outside of just comfortability and red tape, but there's implementation and all these components that are going to be very hard for banks to implement, right? Especially these regional and small banks, credit unions, things like that. So I've seen in the AI of somebody who's just sitting there, not like talking about wanting to do something with AI, but not having any clue or even starting, right? And
Exactly.
I think no one has a clue really, right? No one has and I think what you said about being curious,
Right.
and I think in business in general, being curious constantly, not too much, right? But I think definitely in AI, because there's so many things that, just like with the web when it came out, right? Like when the internet came out, there's so many things that nobody knew. You know, who thought you could put music online or Audible, or that you could buy stuff, or that you could watch videos even eventually, right? So you take that same like wide increase in technology over a short period of time, I think we're going to see even a wider gap in a shorter period of time with AI. And if you're not being curious, I just urge people, because I did a couple different talks, and one was in a lot around the investing and just these older markets, right, where they're just not thinking about this. They don't think it's important, right, because they are so big. but those are the people that are going to be hurt the most in 2 years when they realize that, oh man, we needed time to build this. Yeah. AI, and now with how fast that's the scary part, is how fast it's moving. Somebody can come out of nowhere and you never saw it coming.
Exactly.
And so you have to be curious of thinking. You can't do competitor analysis. Really, you have to do your own internal innovation and R&D. Your R&D.
I would say in R&D, you should have somebody paying attention to new technologies, and AI being at the top of that list. Because I believe leaders today, they're probably pretty confused about AI because they're getting bombarded. And my AI guy says there are thousands of wrappers, meaning you've got maybe OpenAI, a large language model at the base, but then they put a wrapper, a user interface around it and say, oh, we do this. And then there's another wrapper, oh, we do this. And so there has to be a lot of confusion out there. And my AI guy says a lot of times you don't want to lean on your IT department to help guide you, because that's not what they do. AI is a whole different dimension. Of course, he's such an AI zealot. He claims, oh yeah, you probably ought to have somebody on the board, who's an expert on AI.
A little self-serving.
Yeah.
Hey, I know a guy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's I love seeing it from the standpoint of some of these developers that have an edge up now on a lot of people, but again, they still don't the business aspects, right? And so you see a lot of developers that can now build technologies and entire businesses in days.
Yeah.
And so that, like, example, back to our fund. So the reason we do post revenue is because, and we were emerging fund, is because like there is so much happening that you can have a company that really doesn't have a founder, really doesn't have a way to go to market or has proven that they can do anything, but it can look like a legitimate company that's been around for a long time. Right. And so, in the bigger companies, right, and you talk about the safety of your data and information too. And your point back to the wrappers and writing on ChatGPT, it's like, right, where is your data going and being used? And I think as a small startup and stuff, you can be curious. You're not at risk as much as, a big corporation with a lot of IP that they're going to go dump all their documents and SOPs into somewhere. Do not put it into ChatGPT natively. Right, figure something else out. There's plenty of other ways to figure that out, but there's gonna be a lot of stuff coming out on this over the years.
So revolutionary. Some of the businesses have been in business a long time.
How are some of those companies where the CEOs are 60s? And they don't have a succession plan. I'm hearing this all the time. That right there, right, is AI's coming about. We didn't plan on it. We didn't prep for it. Oh shit! What do we do now? What are they doing? What are the ones that are doing it right? I guess, in your opinion, what are they doing?
Well, I think they have peers that they lean on, because I believe when you align yourself with a group of peers, you're going to learn a lot, because everybody has different perspectives, different experiences, different knowledge, and lean on that, because I think you'll probably trust your peers more than you will just a newspaper article.
Or you or I, yeah.
I think that's the kind of one of the best ways to learn.
Yeah. We were talking about that a little bit. One of the biggest shifts, because I made a lot of shifts. We were talking about the burnout and some of those things, and probably the biggest thing I could pinpoint back to that over the last 15 years, 20 years being in business is this last 2 years, whereas I've never been in a mastermind group until starting 2 years ago, and I'm in 2 now. And I'm open and more vulnerable with people. That's another big thing I changed. So like I always and it was all in my head. A lot of these tricks, a lot of these things are in my head. And the fact that I wasn't in a peer group, I wasn't in a safe space.
Yeah.
Right. And that was part of it, is I didn't trust anyone enough to dive into that. And so getting myself into these groups, or it's powerful. It's not, you have 9 other people in that group, but you're not getting 9 times, you're getting almost 100 times more efforts, because you're not only learning different ways of how to do it or how to handle certain situations or different things, because a lot of us have hit our heads on the wall, in one of these facets or multiple of them, and have caused us, unnecessary delays, unnecessary stress and things, because we're sitting there lonely, not knowing that there's ways to like get this out there and still not, degrade your business or you, right? And so, yeah, like in our mastermind, was talking about divorce stuff and buyouts and just all kinds of stuff that you can't just go like put a social media post out. Hey, I need a attorney to help with this lawsuit,
Right.
And as much as you get into business, I told first time I ever had a lawsuit, and we were lenders, so we had a lot of lawsuits when people didn't. Hopefully not as many, right? But you don't want the lawsuits because it means that somebody didn't pay. But sometimes you have to. And one guy told me, it was one of our investors early on in one of my companies. He said, if you've been in business any amount of time and you've done anything substantial or important, don't be surprised if you sue somebody or somebody sues you. Like it's going to happen, right?
Is this just your first?
Yeah, exactly. And so I had to go through that too. But that's the kind of stuff that like nobody talks about on shows. Nobody really dives deep into the vulnerability, right? And I think these peer groups are like a good first, like probably the biggest improvement you could do on something like that is to start there. There's other things you can be doing, but like I think getting into something like that, whatever it is, whether it's Vistage or any of the other groups or a local group or anything, is just like having the people that you can trust that understand your positions that you have to be put in. Because a lot of people, if you're not a business owner, you're not going to understand, right?
By the way, congratulations for being part of a group. I tell prospective members the most important thing for you to be part of this group is you got to be vulnerable. And I lost a member. Never had an issue. I'll get through this. He put this facade on. I'll tough it out and wouldn't lean on the others. So you're not going to learn. If you don't admit you need help, you're not going to learn. So congratulations, because that's a big part of it. Yeah. But it does take trust, because so many people relate vulnerability to weakness. And you're only going to open up if you fully trust those that are around the table. And that takes time.
And some pride and ego comes into play on the flip side of it, right? And that was more me. It wasn't so much honest. If I were being truly honest, it was more pride and ego and than it was. Yeah. So, but no, it's a journey, and I'm glad you came in here. I appreciate it.
I'm so thrilled to be here.
I want people to get the book. I already bought the book. I already started reading it. I need you to get you to sign it though. And so how can people connect with you? How can people buy the book? Do you have a website, social? Yep. We'll put all this stuff in the notes too.
You can buy the book. You can get a hold of me on jimbramlett.com.
Okay.
It's out on Amazon and other locations. I'm a big LinkedIn user, so you want to connect on LinkedIn and reach out. I'm happy to. I love business. I love helping leaders any way I can. I'm not going to help you with your technical expertise. That's not what I'm all about. Mm-hmm. But if I can cheerlead you, if I can listen, I think leaders need somebody that will just lend their ear. When I went through my first stint back in '99, my wife didn't want to hear any of this. And I don't blame her.
Yeah.
I don't blame her. And so I didn't have anybody. And it became a really lonely job. So, that's where you can find me, jimbramlett.com, LinkedIn. I'm happy to help. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And I want to leave everyone with one last comment. I'm not going to ask you what the biggest thing, because you already told that. What's the biggest thing that but I do want to ask something a little more pointed of when you were in your early 20s, right? If you were to go back and talk to that same Jim and you'd be like, hey, what would you tell that Jim to do differently than he did at that stage, or think differently?
I'm pretty hard-headed, so I would say be more open-minded. But I'm going to tell you another story. So when I graduated, Southwest Missouri State at the time. The only company who was interviewing at the time on campus was this little company called Walmart. And I got it in my head. I had this belief that, wait a minute, it took me 4.5 years. I didn't go to school 4.5 years and do all this work to sit behind a customer service counter and take toaster returns from blue-haired ladies. I am not doing that. This is when they had about 200 stores, okay? So that's my hard-headedness. Had I interviewed, had I got hired, and I worked hard, I'd been on the beach a long time ago because...
Who knows? Who knows, though,
So
right?
you got to be open-minded. Mindset is, I never used to think about mindset. Mindset is conscious, and it's real critical. And I learned this yesterday. I didn't really thought about this, but I've told people this in the past. When I was first CEO, I would make these off-the-cuff comments, snide remarks, Well, that travels its way through the organization, and they take it as gospel. Yesterday, somebody reminded me, we had a speaker at my group, and he said, as a leader, you're on stage, and you're always on stage. If you come in the door and you fail to say hi to, say, the receptionist, they're going to go, what I do wrong? What I do wrong? You're on stage as a leader. Everybody's looking at you, all your actions, all the things you say. And so you said it earlier, it's a hard job. But just keep in mind that you're a role model, and people pay attention to what you say, how you act, and just be cognizant of that.
Yeah.
That's another piece of advice.
I love that. Awareness. I appreciate it. That was a good one to end on. So,
okay, man.
Jim, I appreciate it. And we'll get this out, and love for everyone to listen. Thanks, you guys.
Austin. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Jim.